Liz, thanks for joining me today to talk about a number of really important topics. And you are the leader of the Women's Impact Initiative that AFP has, and you're leading it this year. I had never heard of the Women's Impact Initiative until I was Googling people who might talk with me about the talk that we'll talk about today. And it was so refreshing to see that it's something that AFP offers. So will you share a little bit more about what that group is?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is wonderful that you're reaching out and offering this to the membership. It's something that we're certainly trying to work on is getting the word out a little bit more about what we're doing. So Women's Impact Initiative was founded in 2018, kind of on the heels of the Me Too movement. And a lot of work that was being done around the idea principles, in particular around the fact that, 70 to 75% of the sector identifies as female. And really at this point, there's a number of factors that sort of disproportionately impact women within the sector. Certainly things that are kind of comparative to other sectors, but also things that are unique to fundraising. And AFP undertook this initiative under the leadership of Tycely Williams, the incredible Tycely Williams, who's been a longtime member of AFP and sits on the AFP board. And so she kicked off the initiative for the first year and a half. We had an incredible summit in Arizona, Phoenix, Arizona, back in 2019, which feels like about 40 years ago because post-COVID, and really just addressing things along the lines of we focus on things like pay equity, um, gender, women in leadership, issues around pay transparency, sexual harassment and other sort of gender-based violence in the sector, donor dominance, and a number of other issues. But really kind of there's four pillars. We focus on advocacy within the sector, education, and sort of providing information and education to members. We also do a mentorship program that's sponsored by the Alfred Group, which is fantastic. And then we also do a lot of work around promoting our values and kind of trying to get the membership engaged in the WE principles. So yeah, so that's what we do.
A lot of great pieces, and I'll link with the video to the Women's
Absolutely.
Impact Initiative page.
Great.
I would love to talk a little bit about that gender pay gap that you referenced that you all are working on. Here's what we
Mhm.
know, that while 70% of individuals, and I think you just said 75% of individuals working in the nonprofit sector identify as female, only 20% of them hold leadership roles.
Mhm.
The average male employee makes 11% more than female counterparts. And even more staggering is the statistic for women of color who make 37% less than their male counterparts for similar roles and are highly underrepresented in leadership positions. So can you
Absolutely.
share a little bit about what you all are doing to focus on that? And also what can we in our individual communities do to make an impact on it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's a sort of a multi-prong approach to combating this issue in the sector. I mean, the first piece is awareness. I think, I feel like this gets discussed often, but I don't know if it always resonates, especially much like a lot of issues in general in life, unless you're the person impacted by it, you don't always pay attention to the statistics. So we're doing a lot of work to try and raise awareness around this in general in the sector. Some things that we're doing as the Women's Impact Initiative is providing, so we did work or collaborated with the American Association of University Women. They offered a salary negotiation training session for free for our members, which was great. It really is even as someone who has become more confident in my negotiation abilities, it was still really interesting to see tips and tricks around things when you're sitting in the room. These are things to consider. So I'd really recommend if anyone can kind of check that out if it's still available. I believe it still is. But we also are aware that these are also systemic issues, right? So, you can teach people a lot of things or try to help them, but when you're combating systemic issues around gender discrimination or racial discrimination, providing people with training is not enough. That doesn't really go address the core of fundamentals of the problem. So we've been doing a lot of advocacy work around pay transparency, supporting that show the salary movement. One of the things that we really pushed and has gone through AFP Global, thankfully last year, um, finally moved to a model where it is required that if you want to post a job with AFP Global's job board, that you have to disclose the salary range. And research shows that salary ranges or pay transparency is a big factor in closing the wage gap for gender wage gap in particular. Women and particularly women of color are already starting at a disadvantaged point in the sense that they're either coming in at a lower salary already, or there's a number of factors that we probably don't have time to go through today that mitigate how women can continue to progress in their career from a salary perspective. And all of those factors, certainly we can train people and teach them and give them the tools to combat that, but we also want to work with the chapters on encouraging pay transparency, because that statistics have shown, again, in organizations or sort of sectors where it's federally regulated that you have pay transparency, the gap is much, much smaller for between women and men in the same roles. And similarly with women of color or people of color, the pay gap is significantly smaller. So, you can look in the US as an example, the federal government, the difference between the federal government and the state governments in the pay gap between men and women is federally is much smaller because it's regulated versus the state level. And obviously trying to tailor our message for both US and Canada because the regulations and government requirements are different. So that's sort of a lot of what we're working on, and just really continuing to highlight this issue and encouraging our male counterparts as well and the men in our sector who are allies to really speak up and advocate around this in their own organizations as well. So.
Yeah, and our chapter recently, I think within the last year, started requiring the salary to be listed in our job postings, which has been great.
Yep.
I have noticed there's more conversation lately, and you shared something on your LinkedIn page, an article by Erica Chen, co-founder of the community-centric fundraising. And it seems like there's some conversation about one of the ways we can address the pay gap is by not having negotiation as part of the salary piece. I thought that was so interesting that the employers could take a step back, really put thought into how they set the salary and say, this is what we're offering, and look at it from an equity at all their employees, make it very equitable across the board.
Yeah, doing an audit of their existing salary bands. Yeah, I think that that's a really excellent. Erica, and a number of people have critiqued some of the work that we're doing around the initiative, especially on the salaries in particular. And I think they're right, and this is what is so important in our sector is this continued dialogue. I think one of the things I'm really enjoying about the Women's Impact Initiative and also seeing what the work of community-centric fundraising is continuing to sort of look at what we're doing and saying to ourselves, if it's not working, why isn't it working and what can we do to make it better? So I always welcome that feedback and critique because I think without it, we just continue to stagnate. And I think all the best innovators and sectors that are innovative are highly critical of themselves in a constructive way. And I think that these are important conversations for us to have. As a white woman, I certainly I don't have the lived experience of being a woman of color negotiating or trying to negotiate a salary. And I know I've received feedback that, some of what we're doing at the impact initiative level is surface level, and kind of, like I said, tackling some of those things, but putting the onus back onto the individual to negotiate within a structure that's already sort of flawed. And I agree with that. I think, there's a lot we need to work on from an advocacy standpoint. And I look forward to continuing to work on that even after I step down as chair at the end of this year. I'm certainly going to continue to be a vocal advocate around this. And yeah, I think we have a lot to learn from our peers who are people of color who have challenges that certainly are unique to our own as white women. And it's an important thing for us to listen and learn and take that with the intention it's intended is to make the whole sector better. So,
Yes.
yeah.
and I know we're talking, we could talk about this for a lot longer, but I want to get to one other piece that you all focus on with the Women's Impact Initiative, and that is sexual harassment in our field. A 2020 fundraising workplace climate survey of AFP members revealed that 76% of respondents have experienced sexual harassing behaviors in their career by a coworker or stakeholder. That statistic's even higher for fundraisers who identify as female at 78%, or as lesbian, gay, or bisexual at 83%. And I know that you have shared your story of, you know, having been sexually harassed by a top donor at an organization you used to work at, and also the barriers that you face trying to find justice and share about that. So I'd love to hear more about what this conversation can look like, what we can be doing, and how we can really shine a spotlight on this issue.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, there's so much we could talk about it. We could be having a 2-hour conversation about this, and I know that's not what people are tuning in for, but I would just encourage people to check out, there is a whole section of our, like the Women's Impact Initiative, a subsection of the site specifically focused on this research and work on it. Ohio State University, we have 2 researchers that have been collaborating with AFP Global on the study. They've brought a lot of academic rigor and sort of really a lot of value to the research because they're also looking at it from an intersectional lens as well. Like you said, our first survey kind of really just focused on gender identity. And then now they're really looking and digging into things like if you are a person of color or if you have, if you identify as gay, lesbian, LGBTQ+, you are disproportionately likely to either face more harassment or very much more severe forms of it. So I think that's been a really important move in the right direction for us again, recognizing everybody comes to the table with different things and different experiences, but also that allows us to then also do better work in how we help with prevention, education, etc. I think, you know, our sector, we have an interesting dynamic. A lot of women, particularly quite a lot of young women, come into this profession with very idealistic goals around what this work is going to be. And as you move through the work and we have a propensity to sort of socialize women a certain way and around how we behave, what we do. That's already problematic in the first place, but then you add the power dynamic of wealthy donors. And you're in a situation where you're meeting with them one-on-one or at events where there's alcohol or there's just already a power dynamic that's being combated. And a lot of women have faced inappropriate comments, touching, sexualized language. I mean, even just the way we're challenging the sector to really think about the way we do things like talk about fundraising, you know, how we teach it. We often, just the word solicitation in itself, or the fact that often fundraising gets referenced in the way of like, it's like going on a first date, or like you wouldn't do that on a first date, you know, like it's just little things. It does over time, it does matter. And then also helping organizations really know how to deal with reporting and creating safe workplaces and what it means to, you know, even if you're a small organization, how you respond to an accusation or someone coming forward and reporting this kind of behavior. How you respond is going to change the trajectory of someone's career as a fundraiser and what they believe about the sector as a whole. So we're doing our best to provide those tools. Again, we know that these are systemic issues that certainly aren't mitigated through just training an individual or just talking to an organization. We're trying to bring all these things together. And there's a lot of people that are really strong advocates for sort of a donor code of conduct and other things that we really think are industry standards that should be set. We know that those are long-term goals, but you know, I think really at the end of the day, the really important thing is that we're trying to provide resources so someone, if they have something happen, can come see what's available and reach out if they need help. So
Well,
yeah.
I'm grateful to you for sharing your story so openly. You know, just since reading what you've experienced, I've talked with some colleagues in the field, and we've all kind of talked about what our experiences have been, and we wouldn't have had that conversation if you hadn't have opened the door for us. So it's definitely helping.
Oh, well, I'm a firm believer that the best, what do they say? The best disinfectant is sunshine. So, you know, um, once we start talking about these things, you can't say that they don't exist. And I think, somebody has to go first. And I'm just glad that I had the support of my family, my friends, my employer to do this work. And I'm grateful that I'm able to help people. So thank you for, it's always good to hear that.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
thank you. So one other topic I want to touch on
Yeah.
is related to women and the pandemic. And certainly we know that women have been impacted on a major level through the
Mhm.
pandemic, that our workforce has, you wrote something in it for Advancing in Philanthropy magazine that was so interesting to me, and talked about the mass exodus of highly trained women, the increased demands on women, certainly during the pandemic, and how our sector in many ways has remained silent about the issue. And I'm going to quote you if you don't mind, but you wrote that we need to reimagine our future and cannot return to normal because it was never good enough. This cannot be a white woman's recovery. That is not better. This needs to be a recovery that recognizes our industry lacks the insights and expertise of Black women and women of color at every level. So in a lot of ways, we have an opportunity here to really make a difference.
Mhm.
Can you share just a little bit more about what a reimagined future could look like, and should look like in our nonprofit field?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, so the piece I wrote was in particular, I was hearing a lot during probably last summer, maybe the spring, that as we were coming out of like the very beginning of the pandemic, a lot of women were already burned out. Disproportionately, regardless of how it's 2021 and you feel like we shouldn't be having this conversation, women still have a propensity to take on the burden, a disproportionate burden, or lion's share of child care, elder care, and other sort of caring aspects of a family. And that includes having to do education, taking care of kids while they're at home. A lot of people, I think what I was trying to get to the crux at, and you can't always write it as, with the nuance. There's a lot of women that have the ability to sort of stay at home and do the homeschooling and take care of their children because they have a partner or a spouse who had a job or a role that required them to either be at the office or was a better paying position. But when you look at the interviews, you look at the research and the statistics, a lot of women of color, and people of color in general, they're often the sole income earner or main provider for their family in the first place. They don't have always the option to be at home, to be doing homeschooling, to be doing care. I mean, they're already probably doing a lot of it, but the pandemic exacerbated that burden. Um, so I think, when we talk about, when I said it can't be a white woman's recovery, there's some privileges that white women statistically come to in this work that other people don't. We've built a sector around that, that this is not the primary sole income generator for a family. Okay, well, that's great if you have a second person to share the income with, but that's not always the case for everybody. That sort of the requirements around events and the evenings and weekends that are spent doing the work, not always something that everyone can do. Transportation, childcare. There's just a lot of things. And I think also it comes back to the crux of pay equity. If we're not paying fairly and we're paying people disproportionately based on either their sex or their race or both combined, have we really created a sector that is going to support growth and recruitment and retention of a diversity of people? I don't think that's where we're at. So how do we use technology? How do we use pay equity? How do we use our ability to advocate for more equity in the sector to do better? And I think that that's what I was trying to get at. And also too, like with the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter protest last year, there's just a lot of, as always, when any of these social movements come up, there was a lot of talk about what people were going to do, and I want to actually see it in action. So sorry to go on this long rambling kind of, there's just so many components and layers to this, but I just think it's so important that we try to remember that um, that the way that we move forward needs to think about accessibility, equity, access. I mean, Erica Chen, to go back to community-centric fundraising, also advocated in that article, perhaps you should be looking at paying your fundraisers of color more for a variety of reasons, including reparations and restitution for everything that's happened in the past. It's an interesting concept and one I think we should really consider. So it's just food for thought. I know it's not always the concepts and things that we put forward or that I put forward aren't always ones that everyone has an appetite for, but I think they're ones that are going to continue to come up if we don't wrestle them or at least have these conversations and dialogue. Yeah. So.
And on a kind of a related note, and to kind of wrap up a lot of big pieces in this conversation.
Yeah, we didn't pick bite-sized conversation.
No, we didn't.
Yeah, that's
Oh my
okay.
gosh.
That's
So
all right.
it's a big piece of it, and what you've really done well is using your voice. And I think, on a local chapter level, how can we use our voice? How can we be mindful of these things that we've talked about? And also any ideas on how we can get involved or stay tuned into the Women's Impact Initiative?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that it's always scary to speak up or stand up for something. Certainly, this has been an evolution for me, and it's certainly not been something I started off necessarily being totally comfortable with. But I did mention this. I was interviewed for a podcast a couple weeks ago, and one of the things I said was, coming in as the chair of the Women's Impact Initiative during a global pandemic of both a health pandemic, an economic pandemic, and a social pandemic of, like we've never seen in 100 years. I didn't really feel I had a choice to stay quiet. And in some ways, I think it's the best thing that could have happened was that it forced me to have a reckoning with my perspective on the work I've done, the kinds of things I've supported, and what I can be doing better. I think everyone needs to sort of take a step back and look at what they're passionate about, what they care about, and what changes they want to see, what would make the sector better, but more importantly, listening to those who are not traditionally at the table, and how do we figure out how to get those voices there. It is a chicken and egg. We can't just expect our sector to become more diverse because we want it to be diverse. We need it to be a more welcoming, accepting, accessible uh, sector that welcomes diversity of thought, diversity of background, diversity of experience. And part of that is about changing the whole dynamic of how we operate. And that's a big, meaty, not easily unraveled concept. But I think what I love is that we're being pushed to think about it. I love that people like you at a chapter level are asking these questions. And I think, um, you know, it would be easier for us to have a checkbox to say these are the things you can do. I think educating yourself on all of these issues, spending time reading about them, having more people feeling like they can come forward and write about them, paying people for their work when they do, that's a really important one as well. Um, I think these are all things that we can do. And then I think Women's Impact Initiative, we are going to be posting in the near future for our next round of sort of applications to join the committee. I'll make sure to share it when I can, and I would encourage people to keep an eye out for that. We really want to see some new, fresh voices at the table, people that really, really believe that they want to do something different and make a change. And I think I'd really encourage anyone in your chapter, whoever's watching, to consider reaching out. If they want to contact me directly on LinkedIn or Twitter, feel free to reach out, and I'd be happy to have a conversation around the work we're doing. So.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Liz. Is there anything else you want to add in? I appreciate your time today.
Oh no, I'm first of all just want to say it's always lovely to engage with chapters. This is the best part of the actual work of being the chair, and then just a real big shout out to the committee as well, and everybody that's come before me in pushing this work forward. Just continuing to build on the great work that everyone else has been doing, and grateful for the opportunity to share that with you today. So appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.